Oh, my nose. Just do it for me, as this as a joke.
That's so silly.
All right, squeeze.
Back then, it meant a lot to me because, I was like very nervous, because I didn't want the on the production.
What'd you say? Please, cause girls are here.
Oh,
That's how it used to sound. Of course, he's not gonna like that.
Not at all. No, I don't like Mike Love at all.
Golden sunshine, surfboards in the sand, and harmonies that felt like waves crashing gently over your soul. That was the essence of the Beach Boys. But behind the sunny facade of America's favorite band was a story more complicated, more painful, and far more human than most fans ever knew. At the center of it all were two cousins, Brian Wilson, the musical genius whose mind lived in symphonies, and Mike Love, the charismatic frontman with a voice that defined an era. They were the heartbeat and the face of the Beach Boys, until their dream turned into conflict. At 84, Mike Love has finally started to speak candidly about his long-standing tensions with Brian Wilson, and what he's saying has left fans both surprised and moved. Their story begins long before the lawsuits, before the fractures, before the fame. In a small Hawthorne, California house in 1958, a teenage Brian Wilson sat at a piano, his fingers stretching across the keys like they were searching for something just out of reach. Mike Love, a year older, stood beside him, his voice rising, in harmony. Those early days were filled with laughter, musical discovery, and an innocence neither of them would ever fully reclaim. Brian wasn't just interested in music, he was consumed by it. Even in high school, he would spend hours studying vocal harmonies, obsessed with groups like the Four Freshmen. By the time the Beach Boys officially formed in 1961, Brian had already written more than 20 songs, each one more ambitious than the last. Mike, meanwhile, understood the other half of the magic, the audience. With his catchy lyrics, stage charisma, and intuitive grasp of what American teenagers wanted, he brought energy and identity to the band's image. Together with Brian's brothers Dennis and Carl and their friend Al Jardine, they created something that felt like a movement. Their early hits like Surfin' and Surfin' Safari weren't just popular, they were revolutionary. They gave sound to a generation that dreamed of the ocean, the road, and endless youth. As the Beach Boys' fame grew, so did Brian's ambitions. By 1964, after a string of smash hits like I Get Around and Fun, 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 Brian made the surprising decision to stop touring. While the band performed across the country, Brian locked himself in the studio, driven by a singular purpose, to make something that went beyond pop music. The result was Pet Sounds, an album unlike anything the band and/or the world had ever heard. Brian began working with elite session musicians known as the Wrecking Crew. He layered sounds in ways that defied the pop formula: harps, accordions, bassoons, bicycle bells, barking dogs. Songs like God Only Knows and Caroline No weren't about cars or surfboards. They were about heartbreak, introspection, and existential longing. Mike Love, returning from tour, walked into this new world and was stunned. This wasn't the Beach Boys he knew. In his memoir, Mike recalls asking himself, how are fans going to sing along to this? He believed in the formula that had brought them so much success: simple, joyful, accessible music. He wasn't trying to hold Brian back, he later claimed. He was trying to protect the band from losing its identity and possibly its livelihood. This creative divide became the emotional fault line in their relationship. Brian wanted to elevate the band into something artistic and profound. Mike wanted to keep the spirit alive, the one that made teenagers scream and dance and buy records by the millions. Even other band members started to feel the tension. Al Jardine later recalled that Mike was deeply skeptical of Pet Sounds and allegedly joked that only dogs could hear God Only Knows. Whether Mike actually said that remains unclear. He has denied it. But the sentiment stuck. It became a symbol of the growing chasm between the cousins. For Brian, Pet Sounds was his masterpiece. For Mike, it was a gamble he feared would sink the group. And despite critical acclaim, Mike's fears were partially realized. While Pet Sounds is now considered one of the greatest albums of all time, it initially underperformed in the U.S. Brian's dream had come to life, but at a cost. Years passed and the tension between Brian and Mike didn't fade. It calcified. What once was a quiet difference in vision exploded in 1994 when Mike Love took Brian Wilson and the band's management to court. The issue? Songwriting credits. Mike claimed that he had been unfairly left off credits for dozens of hits, including I Get Around, Help Me, Rhonda, and California Girls. These were songs that had defined not just a band, but an era. According to court documents, the songs had generated over $50 million in revenue. Mike believed he was owed both financial compensation and public recognition. The courtroom became a tragic theater. Brian, then struggling with serious mental health issues, was present but distant, visibly shaken and withdrawn. Fans gathered, outside the courthouse holding signs begging for peace. Inside, Mike presented handwritten lyric drafts and recordings that supported his case, and the court agreed. He was officially recognized as co-writer of 35 songs and awarded $5 million. But the victory came at a cost. Critics and fans accused him of betraying Brian at his most vulnerable. In a Mojo interview, Mike tried to explain, "I never wanted to hurt Brian, but the truth must be respected." For Mike, it was about justice and dignity. For Brian, it was another betrayal in a life filled with them. Al Jardine later said, "Mike deserved the credit, but the lawsuit pushed Brian deeper into the shadows. The damage wasn't just legal, it was personal." The Beach Boys, once a family, now felt like a business fractured by loss and ego. The lawsuit didn't just divide royalties, it permanently altered their bond. Yet in 2012, a flicker of hope emerged. For the band's 50th anniversary, the surviving members, including Mike, Brian, Al Jardine, David Marks, and Bruce Johnston, reunited for a world tour. On stage, singing Good Vibrations under the California night sky, it felt, for a moment, like the magic was back. Fans cried. Brian smiled. Mike stood tall, his voice still bright. The album That's Why God Made the Radio debuted at number 3 on the Billboard 200, a stunning success after all those years. It was supposed to be a new chapter, but almost as soon as it began, it ended. Mike announced he would continue, touring under the Beach Boys name, but without Brian, Al, or David. The decision was legal. Mike had purchased the rights to the band's name in the late 90s, but emotionally, it felt like another split. Brian, heartbroken, penned a public letter saying, "I feel like I've been erased from my own band." Fans revolted. A boycott campaign trended on Twitter under the hashtag #BoycottMikeLove. Meanwhile, Brian began performing Pet Sounds in smaller venues with Al Jardine by his side. His concerts became sacred rituals for devoted fans, not just performances, but tributes to the creative spirit that had once changed music. Mike, meanwhile, continued with his touring band, still drawing large crowds, still singing the songs of summer. And yet, something had shifted. Mike, now older, started to speak more openly about the past and the pain. In recent interviews, Mike Love has expressed a kind of sadness that had long been buried beneath his public persona. In a 2020 Billboard conversation, he said, "I never wanted to push Brian away. He's part of my blood. Every step I take carries the regret of losing him." He has admitted to calling Brian occasionally, just to check in, to talk about music, or to remember the old days in Hawthorne. Brian, now 82, has faced serious health challenges. In 2019, he was placed under legal conservatorship due to a schizoaffective disorder and mild dementia. Even so, he continues to perform when he can. At a 2018 show in Los Angeles, Brian played Pet Sounds in full to a crowd of 5,000. His voice wasn't as strong, but it didn't matter. Every note carried history, heartbreak, and beauty. Mike has said he wishes they could write one more song together. He imagines sitting beside Brian at a piano, just the two of them, trying to find one more harmony, one more chorus that could bring them back to where it all began. Fans around the world cling to that hope. On Reddit, one user wrote, "I cried listening to God Only Knows. If Mike and Brian reconcile, I need nothing more from life." A 2020 Pitchfork article called the idea of a final reunion a miracle greater than any of their hits. Whether that moment will ever come is uncertain. But what's clear is this. The story of Mike Love and Brian Wilson is not just about music. It's about youth, ego, family, pain, and the unshakable bond of shared dreams. Even after everything, Mike still refers to Brian as family. Maybe that's the final note, not a song, but a fragile, unspoken harmony that lingers long after the music fades. In Good Vibrations, Mike Love once wrote, "Brian's health is a wall, but I won't give up. His spirit is still there, waiting to be called home." That sentence lingered like a quiet prayer through the decades of chaos, fame, and emotional silence. One evening in 2022, Mike found himself alone in his living room, holding a vinyl copy of Pet Sounds, as the haunting intro of Caroline No played. It didn't just bring back memories. It broke something open inside him. It was as if the music traveled through time, straight from their youthful ambition to the complicated present. Mike later admitted in a 2023 Rolling Stone interview, "I heard the song and broke down in tears. I saw Brian in my mind, smiling like he used to. I just wanted to say, 'You are everything, Brian.' It wasn't just nostalgia. It was love, buried under years of lawsuits, miscommunications, and the price of survival. That moment wasn't regret. It was a quiet promise, a hope to reconcile before time runs out." Despite everything, the legacy of the Beach Boys endures. According to the RIA, the band has sold over 100 million records, with 22 singles hitting the top 40 on the Billboard Hot 100. Albums like Pet Sounds and Smile are enshrined in the Grammy Hall of Fame. Their influence stretched across generations, from Paul McCartney and Elton John to Taylor Swift. Yet, behind that success is a scarred brotherhood. Brian told The Independent in 2020, "Every time I hear California Girls, I think of Mike, of when we were one. I hope he's happy." A simple phrase, but one that shines like a beam through the fog. Mike, for all his resolve and showmanship, still carries that complicated mix of pride and sorrow. "If I could go back," he told Rolling Stone, "I'd hug Brian tight and say nothing matters more than him." Whether reconciliation will ever come is uncertain, but their bond, stretched thin, bruised, but unbroken, still flickers in harmonies, memories, and the dream that one day they'll share the stage once more. The Beach Boys were never just a band. They were brothers, dreamers, survivors. Mike Love's place in that story remains one of the most debated. Was he the savior of the group or the man who clipped its creative wings? It's a question that still echoes like an unfinished melody, lingering just out of reach. When the Beach Boys began drifting in the late 60s, it was Mike who stepped in, not as a musical genius, but as the steady hand keeping the ship from sinking. As Brian Wilson withdrew deeper into personal battles, the band's creative nucleus faded. Albums like Friends, 1968, and 2020, 1969, failed to make a major impact. Many critics and fans assumed the group's golden days were over, but Mike didn't walk away. He doubled down. According to Rolling Stone, he organized over 100 performances per year through the 1970s, keeping the Beach Boys on the road across America, Europe, and Japan. He negotiated crucial deals with Capitol and later Warner Brothers, refusing to let the name Beach Boys fade into history. In his 2016 memoir, Good Vibrations, he humbly wrote, "I'm not a brilliant songwriter like Brian, but I knew how to keep the band alive." His persistence gave birth to new successes: Sunflower, 1970, Holland, 1972, albums that helped the group stay musically relevant. But Mike's decisions didn't please everyone. He insisted on performing hits like Help Me Rhonda and I Get Around, focusing on what the audience wanted rather than chasing new experimental directions. Carl Wilson, in David Leaf's biography, once quipped, "Mike plays it too safe." Meanwhile, Al Jardine grew frustrated with creative restrictions, and Dennis Wilson spiraled deeper into addiction. Behind the scenes, it was chaos. Yet Mike kept showing up. In a 2019 Mojo interview, he said, "People criticize me, but no one understands the pressure I was under." By the late 70s, their touring revenue hit $5 million annually, a staggering amount for a band some had written off. And as newer acts like Led Zeppelin and Fleetwood Mac took over the charts, Mike fought harder to keep the Beach Boys visible, even if it meant clashing with those who once called him brother. He organized 150 shows annually in the 80s, pulling in $10 million a year, according to Billboard. Bruce Johnston, in a 1980 interview, summed it up plainly. "Mike's not loved, but he's the one who kept us from collapsing." For better or worse, he was the keeper of the flame. The genius might have been gone, but the music still played, thanks to Mike. Then came one of the most defining and damaging moments in Beach Boys history, the 1988 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. The moment should have been triumphant. After decades of ups and downs, the Beach Boys were finally recognized alongside legends. But Mike's acceptance speech became an instant controversy. He publicly called out Mick Jagger and Paul McCartney, sounding bitter and erratic. The press pounced. Rolling Stone dubbed it a PR disaster. In hindsight, Mike admitted in a 2019 Mojo interview, "I was under too much pressure just trying to protect my legacy. I'm not a smooth talker, but I spoke from the heart." He became the villain in the public's eyes, difficult, arrogant, unforgiving. But the story, like so many in music history, wasn't that simple. Mike Love carried more weight than anyone knew. He wasn't just a front man, he was the CEO, the tour manager, the peacemaker, the punching bag. He answered for Brian's absence, paid the crew, soothed angry promoters, and tried to keep the family from shattering entirely. In Good Vibrations, he confessed, "I felt lonely steering the band. Brian is my brother, but I had to be strong for everyone." Even through the 1990s and 2000s, when Brian made brief returns and solo ventures, Mike never stopped working, never stopped trying. Theirs is a story of both triumph and tragedy. Two boys from Hawthorne, California, who reached the stars, then lost sight of each other in the blinding light. Mike Love, the guardian or the antagonist, depending on where you stand, gave everything he had to preserve the Beach Boys. Without him, the music might have died long ago. With him, it lived, scarred, complicated, but alive. And so, we end where we began, in the echoes of a harmony, in the ache of what could have been, and in the hope that somehow, someday, those two voices might blend again. So, if you had to choose a side, would you stand with the dreamer who built the sound or the brother who fought to keep it alive? Leave a comment below, share your thoughts, and help us keep uncovering the untold stories of music history. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We have so much more to tell.